Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar, Waste Reduction, National Survey Results, and Campaign Solutions that Look Upstream. This is Heather Creven, the Executive Director of the Nebraska Recycling Council. The Nebraska Recycling Council is a statewide, member-based, nonprofit organization supporting communities, businesses, solid waste, and recycling industries to improve recycling collection and infrastructure. Our mission is to maximize the economic and environmental benefits of resource recovery in Nebraska and waste absolutely nothing. NRC administers the small equipment grants for the Nebraska Environmental Trust and also receives grant funding from the Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality and the Nebraska Environmental Trust. For more information, please visit our website at www.nrcne.org. I'm excited and grateful to welcome Kelly Dennings as the presenter today. The Center for Biological Diversity develops and executes campaigns to address how the effects of population pressure and inequality consumption impacts our environment. We know the statistics. The average American has an environmental footprint 60% larger than most European. And each American makes nearly twice as much waste now as a person did in 1960. They are working on solutions. Effective campaigns are underpinned by research. And to that end, the center recently conducted a U.S. national representative survey and multiple focus groups to better understand consumption awareness, attitudes, and behaviors specific to the following topics: zero waste planning, extended producer responsibility, and conscious consumption. The results of this research will support the center in building future campaigns. They also invite the audience to share their ideas with them in the hopes of identifying partnerships willing to collaborate and work together. Kelly Dennings is a campaigner with the nonprofit Center for Biological Diversity. Prior to the center, she worked as a local government recycling coordinator and for the North Carolina's Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Keep America Beautiful, and the American Forest Foundation. She holds a bachelor's degree in natural resources from North Carolina State and a master's degree in public health from the University of South Florida. During the webinar, please type your questions in the chat box as they come to mind, and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. A recording of this presentation will be available following this webinar on our website under the Resources tab at www.nrcne.org. Thank you again for attending. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Kelly. There may be a slight delay before she begins.
Thank you so much, Heather. Hopefully everybody can see my slide deck and hear me. My webcam's on, I'm not sure if you're seeing it. But I'm very excited to be speaking with you today. And Heather, thank you so much for the invitation to speak and the generosity in letting me do some research with your group last year. So as Heather mentioned, my name is Kelly. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a campaigner with the center. I want to acknowledge and honor that I'm currently on the traditional territory of the Powhatan, Monacan, and the Cherokee. See if I can get my slides. Perfect. If you're not familiar with the center, we're a national nonprofit conservation organization with more than 1.7 million members and online activists. And we work through a combination of science, the law, organizing, and creative media to protect wildlife and the wild places they need to thrive. On the screen, you're seeing all of the different programs. So Heather gave a pretty good bio of me, so I won't go into the details, but I did specifically wear a red shirt today to honor all the Huskers out there. So I grew up in Nebraska, actually in Elkhorn. I went to school there from kindergarten through 12th grade. So I'm a little disappointed I don't get to come in person and talk with you all, but it is wonderful to speak with you today. So the US is 5% of the world's population, but uses 30% of all resources and creates 30% of all waste. And you heard in the introduction that, environmental degradation is impacted by those in the global north. And the countries in purple on this slide use more than 4 times the resources than those in yellow. Taking that one step further, you can look at this as it relates even to a homeless person in the United States. Somebody like that emits more metric tons of carbon annually than the average person in other parts of the world. And this major factor for this is the array of government services that are available to everyone in the United States. And these basic services include police, roads, libraries, the court system, and the military, which, if were allocated equally to everyone in the United States, would look similar to this data on the screen. And Heather also mentioned, that we are consuming and generating more and more waste per year. We are making nearly twice as much as we did now as a person did in 1960. So kind of taking all of those stats and that data, we conducted a survey to analyze the awareness, attitudes, behavioral intention, and norms around these topics. We surveyed 899 people across the United States for a nationally representative sample with a 95% confidence interval. I can go into all the statistics if people want. You can ask me afterwards. But the survey had 16 questions about population, consumption, climate change, and wildlife. And 5 of the questions were actually from a previous survey that the center conducted in 2013, and we were looking to gauge change over time. And as Heather mentioned, we really want to use these results to inform our future work. So lots of data here. I'm only going to go over a portion of it today that I think is most relevant to this. So you can see from this chart that between 2013 and 2019, there was a 24% increase in those who think the US is doing too little to protect natural resources. And you can see from this chart that between 2013 and 2019, there was a 26% increase in those who think that the average American consumes too many natural resources. So the good news here is that awareness is growing, but we need to translate that into action. One of our more interesting statistics that came from the national survey was we took that previous question, the average American consumes resources, and we compared that to the results of a fill-in-the-blank statement. In comparison to the average American, does the survey responder think they consume more, fewer, or the same amount of resources? Well, interestingly, 74% think the average American consumes too many natural resources, but when asked about one's own behavior, 48% believe they consume fewer natural resources than others. So oftentimes narratives say that population growth is mainly responsible for the rapid loss of species biodiversity, while others say it's consumption. The center focuses on both of these topics, but we were interested in knowing what the general public thought. So you can see here from our survey that about 60% see the issue as being both also. I'm only going to focus on the consumption side today, but we do work on both topics. So we asked people about their current behaviors and their willingness to change behavior. 67% said that they were currently reducing their personal consumption. but 82% were willing to do that. However, 31% needed more information. So in looking at these 82% that are willing to reduce their personal consumption, they were more likely to be between the ages of 50 and 64, female, have a higher degree, like a bachelor's, a master's, or a PhD, be a Democrat, make over $50,000 a year, participate in any religion, be in a minority race or ethnic group, and have no plans for future children. So when I came to Nebraska in 2019, and I conducted the focus groups that we'll talk about here in a minute, I also did a social marketing training on how to get to social and behavior change. So if anybody was part of that training last year, you'll realize that tools like this persona that I'm showing on the screen are a way to help the center build campaigns so that we know who's our low-hanging fruit, or who's our choir, so that we don't talk to them. So we're kind of using all of these resources from the survey to help us build campaigns going forward. So the center not only focuses on individual behavior change, but systematic changes, whether that be through voting or advocating for policy. So we asked, we asked them who was voting for policymakers that acknowledge consumption impacts the environment. And 39% were currently doing that. And 77% said that they were willing to, but 34% needed more information. So that was a quick summary of our national survey that we did. But we did this great set of focus groups that provided us all this rich qualitative data. So that's where I'm going to switch to next. So we conducted 3 focus groups around the topics, as Heather mentioned: zero waste, the experiential economy, extended producer responsibility, and conscious consumption. And we picked these areas of interest based off the Urban Sustainability Director's Network Sustainable Consumption Mind Map, which is what I'm showing here on the screen. So if you haven't visited this is a really great tool that you may want to jump onto, and the URL here is at the bottom. But so we held 3 focus groups, 2 of which were in Nebraska, and 1 of which was in Virginia. So thank you to everyone that participated with us, and I'm really pleased to be showing you these results. So around this topic of zero waste, most participants mentioned only composting and recycling when thinking about the term zero waste. A few reuse examples were given, but nothing was talked about around waste prevention. The group talked about packaging, social norms, and endless growth. These were all topics that were mentioned. And I've highlighted some interesting quotes on the screen here. And I'll pause just a little bit for you to read them. I'm not going to read them verbatim. But I think it helped us understand what people were thinking. And keep in mind, these were recycling professionals. And so it gives us a little insight into people that are really knowledgeable. So the solutions that we garnered from this discussion around zero waste was that there was this thinking that we should kind of change the terminology, because it really suggests perfection, and it's really hard for folks to live up to that. And I know when I worked in local government, I was asked to create a zero waste event toolkit and kind of like process for our internal events that were held at the county. And I chose to call it a zero waste event manual, a low waste event manual, because it was just very, very hard to get people to understand zero waste. It wasn't really zero waste. So I think maybe the zero waste train has left the station, but to some people it does suggest perfection. The thinking was that we needed to work more upstream with designers and engineers, because they are not designing for zero waste, and we're kind of left with the results at the end that we all have to handle, whether that be through disposal or recycling. And we had a really robust discussion, which interested me quite a bit, around clarifying the public health rules associated with reusing your own container. You know, there were people that were saying, you know, I've heard that you can't take your you know, cup up to the fountain and, you know, fill your own drink again with your own cup. And so honestly, I had made this one of my main work plan goals for 2020. But of course, with COVID, that kind of got blown out of the water. But I do want to come back to this and address it later in the presentation. So the next thing we asked about was the experiential economy. And to be honest, you know, this needed some description. It wasn't something that a lot of people were familiar with. So the group's thinking immediately around the experiential economy went to this quintessential Disney trip, which, you know, was also mentioned, it brings in one's carbon footprint into the discussion. So this would not necessarily be, there might be physical waste prevention, but it wouldn't be, you know, global greenhouse gas prevention. But what was really great was fellow participants were able to explain that an experience could be local and it could be environmentally friendly. And hopefully the quotes on the screen depict this. You know, there was this idea of, you know, just inviting people over for dinner at your house could be the experiential economy. Maybe you shopped local at a, you know, local brewery to bring home a growler or something like that. So the main suggestion for the center regarding this topic was, again, this idea of providing a good definition of what the experiential economy is and guidelines on how to make an experience environmentally friendly, you know, so we don't all think of this trip to Disney. So then we went to another set of folks and did a second focus group. And at this one, we talked about extended producer responsibility. And I brought up the term planned obsolescence and right to repair. And, you know, there was kind of really a lack of awareness around these topics within the recycling community that we were talking with. And this is the first place this notion of capitalism came up. And so I kind of wanted to read this quote. So the quote was, when it comes down to it, when it comes down to is we live in a society that is capitalistic. That's how our economy works. We encourage people to buy it because you deserve it, because it will make you beautiful, even though you don't need it. That's how the economy works. And last year was my first year with the center, really kind of doing a lot of listening sessions, you know, with other folks beyond just these focus groups. And this idea of, you know, addressing capitalism really did come through in a lot of the conversations I was having. One recommended solution from this particular focus group was to create a clearinghouse of information about those companies that do planned obsolescence or about the companies that provide take-back programs. So it was really hard to know what companies were doing to have the transparency and the ability to pick products when you really didn't know what companies were doing, whether they provided a take-back program or not. So the last thing that we talked about was this idea of conscious consumption. So between the first part of the discussion about extended producer responsibility and this part about conscious consumption, there was this interesting back and forth regarding the thinking that one person could or could not make a difference. And I think the quote, because, you know, extended producer responsibility is focusing on this upstream issue, whereas conscious consumption is working on individual behavior change. And so the quotes that I picked to depict, the quotes I've picked to share with you depict this. The quote in yellow says that the consumer has the power over the manufacturer, right? It's your pocketbook making that decision. You're using your buying power. The blue quote tells us of someone that's motivated to shop consciously, but these larger societal structures like work and childcare really make it difficult. And then the bottom one notes that, choosing one product over another requires knowledge and that it's a privilege that not everybody has. So one solution mentioned in this section was the need for transparency on the part of manufacturers so that one could consume consciously. So people were really making the connections between the upstream manufacturers and the downstream individual behavior change. So I took the focus groups from Nebraska and I went and conducted another one in Virginia. And so I probed a little bit further on this idea of upstream and downstream responsibility. I talked about consumerism versus capitalism, and I also asked about organizational versus individual change. So again, the focus groups were made up mostly of local and state government recycling professionals. And what was interesting was they saw themselves as downstream actors, handling waste after a manufacturer creates it and an individual consumes it. So this is what I'm calling the waste disposal view on the screen. However, as participants in an institution, they're also upstream actors, like manufacturers, capable of creating change for individuals through policy and regulation, which I show here on the screen as the solutions view. So the sentiment from the group was that people feel they have the right to consume, even if levels impact the bigger environmental picture or themselves in the future. And overcoming this perception of entitlement is pretty difficult. In this line of questioning, equity really came up a number of times. In a previous focus group, the sentiment was that capitalism wasn't the issue if it works the way it should, by creating products needed by individuals and markets supply the demand. But participants in this one believe that the manufacturers are now telling us or marketing to us what we need in a predatory way, hence causing more of this consumeristic issue. And this is what I kind of tried to probe on. So, the barriers noted by participants to working with upstream entities was this lack of trust and skepticism of companies to do good things. This lack of transparency around what corporations and governments were doing. And then even this lack of leadership, lack of access to leadership to people within these groups, and lack of empowerment or the individual sense of helplessness. So it was a really interesting and robust project to hear that other people were grappling with this. We live within these systems that, create us to be consumers. So how do we, change what can be some really, really big systems? So many attendees, so there was still this question about, who really holds this power? Many attendees said they will tell their residents to call the manufacturers when all of a sudden their packaging can no longer be recycled by their town, right? And I'm sure we're all encountering this now with China's national sword and other things occurring. So, one participant mentioned even that the vendor, the retailer, or the distributor is also this middleman that could help make change. But again, it was noted that, capitalistic market forces dictate what products are created. So an individual can impact change through their purchasing power. And maybe this is in an aggregated way, similar to, I always say, every can and bottle matters, right? But you need to have a lot of can and bottles to make them matter. And there was some discussion about how, other examples of how this has worked out, whether that was cigarettes, smoking cessation, plant-based foods, and concentrated laundry detergent. So participants agreed that an individual can cause change, but then the question was, but will they? Do they? Do people take the time to call the manufacturer and say, hey, my local government is no longer accepting this? So this was really a common narrative among the upstream, and this narrative about an individual holding the power is common among upstream entities to deflect, to say that they're really just creating a product or a package because it's being requested by individuals and the market is responding accordingly. Really kind of putting all of the responsibility on the individual to make this change happen. So sentiments like manipulation, predatory, poor quality, and lost consumer rights all came up in these discussions. And the center really believes that this is not an either or. We need to work with individuals and manufacturers. Okay, so that was the end of the focus group, but I wanted to address COVID. So I'm going to dive into this a little bit because, of course, I'm sure it's on everybody's mind. So thank you again to everyone that participated in those focus groups. So for those of you that attended my social marketing training last year, you might recognize this graphic on the screen. Well, this spring, the Shelton Group conducted some social media listening, Facebook and Twitter, things like that, to learn what fringe consumers can tell us about the post-pandemic marketplace. And they shared this report and did a presentation for GreenBiz. So if you want to see it, I'm sure you could visit GreenBiz. Again, the citations here on the slide. But they believe understanding what is on the fringe, which is our innovators and early adopters here on this slide, can help companies be prepared for possible futures and, help us turn threats into opportunities. So if you'll remember by the diffusion of innovation, you need around 17% of people to be thinking about something or saying something for a tipping point to occur where the sentiment moves from the fringe to the majority. So what the Shelton Group learned was some hope that COVID-19 will bring about system-wide reform, similar to the changes following the bubonic plague. Social distancing has reminded consumers that individual actions do have an impact beyond just themselves, and that their actions impact their communities. And consumers are watching how companies are responding to the pandemic, and they're going to think that they're going to be looking at that and how they relate to climate change. So they also found that there was an increase in questioning capitalism as an economic model, which, as I mentioned to you, just kind of came up in our focus groups also. So I wanted to tie in this data, this national data coming from the Shelton Group, that they were hearing similar things. So the toll of COVID has definitely been tragic, and the uncertain future of what it means for people long-term is frightening. But what we can take away from this is that policymakers and individuals are capable of swift, dramatic changes, and that those changes can help the environment. Conscious consumption may mean that you need to consume less. Some may need to consume differently, and others may need to consume more. So our goal really should be to reinforce and lock in new sustainable lifestyle practices that people are conducting now during COVID. And I think opportunities exist through increased efficiency as well as design considerations to optimize material use, reuse, and recovery. And we need to look to new cultural and business models to leverage approaches that shift from material consumption to service utilization with closed material loops. So I want to address reuse during the time of COVID because that is one of the main strategies for waste prevention. And there's been a lot of confusing information put out there. But a group of over 150 epidemiologists signed a support letter for the use of reusables, saying that they are no more unsafe than single-use products. And I highly recommend you check out Upstream Solutions, who's leading the work around this. And they're also coordinating a monthly learning and networking call for state and local governments interested in working on reuse. But let me quickly highlight some additional points about reuse. So reusables can save businesses money, help restaurants, venues, and food service operations cut costs, and zero waste systems built around reuse along with recycling and composting, as you all know, creates local jobs and builds resilient, equitable communities. And when we outsource this stuff, you know, it doesn't help these local communities, but reuse systems are built on local economies for creating logistics for collection, dishwashing, drop-off, and inventory management. And supporting these local and regional supply chains means that we're not at the mercy of these global supply chains, you know, which can fall apart in the times of crisis. I don't think anybody has to forget, you know, the toilet paper woes we all had in March and April. And this idea of bring your own blank, whether that be, you know, a mug or a silverware or a cup, is great, but we need reusable packaging systems run by businesses so that consumers don't have to remember to bring their own. And hopefully we'll instill societal norms that nourish creativity, connection, community, sustainability, health with a diverse and equitable lens. And when you think about building these campaigns and these projects, hopefully we're co-creating them in a new world, writing solid waste, zero waste plans, you know, led by people who are most impacted by garbage disposal and recycling, and creating, you know, safe, green jobs, enacting policies that help us to build new business models. Okay, in conclusion, our research showed us that people are willing to change their own behavior or advocate for policy improvement, but 30% needed more information, and the center hopes to build on that people power. So one way of doing that is we have a couple of campaigns. Our wildlife-friendly wedding guide lays out many ways to reduce waste, decrease carbon emissions, and make weddings wildlife-friendly, which I know in time of COVID might be a few months before we get back to that. The Sokind Alternative Gift Registry and Wishlist service, formerly a program of New Dream, encourages the giving of alternative gifts. And it's a free and customizable interactive website. And the center, we're really happy to have become its steward this year. Another campaign of New Dreams that the center is now supporting is Simplify the Holidays. This is a new microsite that provides useful tools, tips, and hacks to give alternative gifts and begin new family traditions. And this is the perfect time of year to share this campaign with your citizens. So feel free to reach out to me if you need some newsletter language or you're looking for some sample social media posts. We can easily get that to you. Another program we have is a Girl Scout Conscious Consumption Patch that's going to be finalized in 2021. We're offering a patch for seniors and ambassadors, which are high school age, with Girl Scouts of Western New York, and we're looking to work with other Girl Scout councils across the country. So if anybody's involved in Girl Scouts, please reach out. And finally, our Beat Food Waste campaign includes 3 guides: shopping, cooking, and one for your fridge. And the center also leads the way in evaluating supermarket food waste. So you can read more about that in our Slow Road to Zero report. I hope you take the time to check these campaigns out. So finally, our focus group showed us that individuals felt helpless and lacked self-efficacy to instigate organizational change and felt they had no consumer rights. I'm asking you to support both individual and organizational change by working within your community to support consuming consciously through not only durable and repairable products, but ask people to think about what they really need. You know, what is going to bring them happiness? Check out one of our 5 campaigns that I just mentioned. Hopefully, you'll support borrowing, sharing, and reuse as much as you can, and leverage your power to help build third-party, safe, sanitized, refillable programs, especially now post-COVID. We need to build back better by creating these local jobs and supply chains to support resilient, equitable communities. And ask companies for product transparency to allow consumers to make these informed decisions. Leverage not only your personal purchasing power, but that of your organization. Look at supporting right to repair laws and help us build corporate or policymaker scorecards for planned obsolescence and extended producer responsibility so that the public can be informed. And advocate or pass laws making companies accountable for their products and packaging. Right now, with so many takeout orders, I'm not sure if you've heard of this campaign called Cut Out Cutlery, where they're working to include cutlery only by request in all of the delivery apps. And if you're not familiar with the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Prevention Act, introduced this year in Congress, please check that out. So let's build people power with justice in mind. If interested in a just and equitable future around these topics, I recommend Googling the solidarity economy. I'm in my own kind of learning cycle with that, but the solidarity economy looks to be a great place for us to find new ideas. And for those interested in working on waste prevention and moving up the waste hierarchy, as Heather said, please reach out. We would love to work with you on this. And if you want to stay engaged with others interested in waste prevention and reuse, and building a small list of folks that want to meet regularly from local government recycling programs to learn from each other and think about potential projects we could work on. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly. That was a great presentation. I do have one question, and that is how to translate it and put it into action, and what would be the next step for a city or a county that wanted to move forward?
Yeah, so I would look at kind of the levers that you have available to you. So, for example, I was really interested in working with public health departments because I think a lot of times they don't necessarily talk to the solid waste department. But when I worked for local government, I'm going to stop showing my screen really quick. I don't know if you guys see my video though. But so when I worked for local government, we worked with our public health department to build out a system for our public health inspectors to educate the restaurants when they went to do restaurant inspections, and they talked to them about food reuse, and they were just not familiar with the Good Samaritan law. And so, you know, we codified the Good Samaritan law within our local public health regs so that we could, you know, feed people that needed food and decrease food waste from the landfill. So maybe there's policy levers or you know, procedures and systems in place that you could do. The other one I think is, you know, this idea of trying to get reuse more integrated into, you know, local government or state government purchasing policies. So those would be kind of all things that you could do locally. I know not always are you able to really advocate for whether that be federal legislation, but if there's nonprofits or others on the call that would be able to do that, you know, that would be something that would be great to really dive into what you can find in this Break Free from Plastic Pollution Prevention Act. And it's very, very comprehensive, from litter abatement to, you know, decreasing single stream plastics to bag bans. But there's lots of ideas in there that you may want to, you know, support something locally. And then, you know, that's kind of all those upstream policy levers. But I felt that as a local recycling coordinator, I was a gatekeeper for information to my citizens in my community. You know, I was doing presentations, I was putting out newsletters, I was in charge of our social media. So, you know, if we could at least pepper in 10% of waste prevention and recycling messages, waste prevention and reuse messages along with our recycling messages, I think that would be going a long ways towards making change. So hopefully those were a few examples.
Question, and that is, what are some of the strongest messages for waste reduction that resonate with your average consumer?
Yeah, I think that the center would really love to continue to do a little bit more work around that. I know there's a group in uh, with Zero Waste Washington who is doing a bunch of work around reuse. And I was talking to her about this idea of planned obsolescence. And she's like, oh, yeah, people just do not understand that term. And so she's trying to play with some language that would resonate better with her citizens. And so the center doesn't, I don't have those results, but we would love to partner with people to do some message testing around that. But my colleague with Zero Waste Washington, we were talking about perceived obsolescence, right? Which is you think something is obsolete because your neighbor got a new lawnmower, or your fellow teenage friend got the new shoes or whatever. And so this idea of perceived obsolescence, and she said that there's just this like emotional component to it, and they're trying to like figure out terminology that would tie it back to these emotions associated with shopping and kind of the idea of keeping up with the Joneses. So more on that to come. I wish there was some more research around messages for waste prevention and reuse.
And Kelly, I'm not showing that I have any more questions at this time, so I think that we can go ahead and end the webinar. I appreciate your time, your efforts. Your hair is really long. The last time I saw you, it was short.
I know, I have not cut it in a while. Well, this was great. Thank you so much, Heather. I mean, I would love if people wanted to put in the chat and had any ideas for me. Please, hopefully you have my my email address. I would love to connect with folks.
That sounds great, Kelly. Have a great rest of your week, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you.